Alright, we're back at working on the Civic again. We are going to be chasing some threaded holes for the subframe. Make sure that everything is good and clean. I'm going to run a tap through them all because some of these bolts, they were hanging up pretty good in here. Sadly, my tap was too short and I didn't have an extension, so I wasn't able to use the normal T-handle. So I was resorted to using an adjustable crescent wrench to get this hole, tapped clean. This was the one that was really bad. In the process, I also cleaned up all of the bolts, ran them through a die, made sure to use cutting liquid on all of them, and thankfully none of the bolts were too bad. If you happen to be fortunate enough to have a nice bend pack lift, or any lift for that matter, and you're going to be working underneath the car or traversing under the car while you're not actually working on the car, make sure that when you raise the car up so that way you have head clearance, you raise it high enough that you actually have head clearance. Case in point, I got a nasty little mark here on my forehead because I was walking underneath the car, wasn't paying attention, and I found my lovely PCI splitter mount here. And now we're back to a time lapse of me preparing the front subframe to go back into the car, just attaching some of the power steering lines that I hadn't attached yet, as well as the rear engine mount before I lower the car down on top of the subframe. And once the subframe is bolted on with 2 bolts and held into place, we're going to raise the car up, and then I can secure it with the remaining bolts that are left. After I inserted the bolts in by hand with a ratchet, I'm just giving it a couple ugga-duggas to make sure that they're all tight. It's a little bit easier. I could properly use a torque wrench, however, I'm just lazy. If you're wondering what I'm doing because the camera angle is bad and so is the lighting, I apologize. However, all I'm doing is inserting the front lower ball joint into the front lower control arms and then securing them in place temporarily with the castle nuts. Alright guys, I'm calling it a night on the red Civic Si. I ended up getting the front subframe back into the car that Corey and I repainted yesterday. I retapped the holes because some of the holes were kind of ugly. One of them real ugly. But all the holes were retapped and they threaded in fine this time. As well as clean up the threads on the bolts. Tomorrow, it's getting the GSR back into the car and getting it as close to complete as I can with the amount of time I have. I regret to inform you that my PC ended up crashing and I lost a lot of the footage regarding the installation of the engine and transmission. So I made a phone call to my friend and longtime supporter of the channel, Bill at Built PCs, and he got me back up and running in little to no time at all. If you have any questions pertaining a PC problem or you're in the market for a new PC, be sure to reach out to Built PCs.
Unleash the power of precision with Built PCs. Pre-built for peak performance, crafted for gamers and creators. At Built PCs, we believe it's the little things that matter most. Visit jawa.gg to order your dream rig today.
As you can see here, I ended up destroying this TPS sensor when we were installing the engine. Thankfully, I had a brand new 70mm skunk tooth throttle body in the box ready to go. I was planning on installing it later down the road, however, what better time than the present. The only downside is when we were trying to install it, the throttle cable bracket off of the throttle body was too long and it would not allow the throttle cable to reach. So I attempted to salvage the GSR throttle body one last time, however the bolts were so badly corroded that I couldn't get them out. Snapped both the heads off even after using an impact screwdriver. So I drilled out the holes, perfectly centering them to try to use an extractor bit. The second I tried to use the extractor bit, the embossment broke right off of the casting, and at this point this throttle body is complete junk. So now we just need to come up with the throttle cable bracket. I ended up having some flat stock laying around the shop. I drilled 2 holes to mount it to the throttle body. Measured out approximately where the throttle cable was going to sit on the plate. Ended up putting a single bend in. Turned out I needed to add 1 more bend. Notched it and drilled the hole for the throttle cable to actually be secured to the bracket, and then bolted it down. As you see, it was a perfect fit. Get this back in the engine and we were back up and running. All that was left was to bleed the coolant system to ensure we didn't overheat on track. However, this was when I noticed that there was a little bit of oil leaking from the passenger side. Turned out I left one of the fittings loose on the remote filter housing. Tightened that up and we were good to go. On our next episode of Grassland Garage, we are going to be harassing some very expensive cars and their owners in the little red Civic Si.